Guess we better hurry. Green. No traffic. We're going to take the switch we flashed last week and do some automated motion lighting. And we're going to use the RGB faceplate to do traffic notifications, all using Home Assistant and Node-RED. So after last week, we showed you how to tear into the RGB switch, and now we did change a couple things in the template since last week as of doing some automation, which we will show how to do that in Node-RED in this video. So one thing we did change in the template was the small little status lights. We don't have them listed as relays anymore, and of course we will leave the template down in the description of the video, but we changed them to LED 1, 2, and 3 inverted. And the reason why we did that is because we didn't need to store them as relays and don't need to store the state of those in the switch itself, so it causes less memory writes to the EEPROM. And we're just going to control them with the LED power commands. And since you are using the RGB face of the switch as a light, and you want to use the color wheel actually in Home Assistant, so if you head on over to my GitHub wiki, there is a section for the lighting. So if we go on over to Smart Bulbs and Lighting, and we are looking for just a standard RGB that's 3 channels, that's going to be the first one. There's 2 set options you need to run on the console. Just simply copy and paste those to the console on the switch. Run them one at a time and you should get the response back. You can copy and paste this section. If you already have a light section, which you probably already do, make sure you don't pick up the light colon. You just want to grab this additional section here. Now, one key thing you want to change in the template is on this switch, it's a little different than, say, a standard RGB light bulb. Relay 1 is the actual relay of the switch itself that turns the lights on in the room. Relay 2, that's the RGB switch for using the colors and the brightness, etc. So that's actually power 2. So once you do paste that into your YAML file, you'll see you'll need to change anything that has power in it. You'll need to change that as power 2, otherwise it won't work correctly in Home Assistant when you're trying to use it in the GUI. So then that, pretty simple for bringing the configuration and using the RGB switch into Home Assistant. So next we're wanting to automate this switch, and what we're going to use in the switch, like we showed, was we're going to use it to give a status light to me in the morning. That way I can check the map for different traffic issues, and maybe I just need to leave a little earlier based on some incident. So one real easy way we're going to do that is use Node-RED. Now if you haven't watched any of the Node-RED videos I did in the past, a lot of them still do apply in the same concept. So definitely give them a watch. We'll give them a link or in the description of the video as well. They're really good for getting your feet wet with Node-RED. So Node-RED is really easy to install if you're using, say, HASS.io. If you're using Docker or some other type of installation, you can also install Node-RED that way. Simply just go through, use the add-on, make sure and follow the link in there. It gives you the help to get it installed on your HASS.io, and it's not too hard to do. So once you get it installed, you need to go into Node-RED, and let's get started. If you haven't already checked out PCBWay for a custom little product, say as your own little RGB switch or sensors in your home for doing Node-RED automations, definitely check them out. There's a lot of shared products on there, or you can do your own PCBWay. Check them out, PCBWay. So this is the goal of what we're going to try to do, is doing some motion control along with the automations using the Waze sensors for travel time between my home and work. Now don't get scared. It may look a little daunting behind me here, but I'm going to break it down. We're going to show you how to do some automation with Node-RED. There's no coding. It's just dropping lines and dragging things around the screen. So let's get started with a blank canvas in Node-RED. So for motion control, we are using a simple Waze sensor since it is battery powered and fits perfectly in the shelf on my bathroom wall. And in that location, it won't pick up the traffic down the hallway. It only picks up the traffic in the bathroom itself. So first thing we're going to do is drag out the state change. And that's what's going to be the trigger that triggers this flow and starts it off. So first we'll drag it out. And then now we'll configure it. So we'll call it the FBath motion. It is using our server, which is the regular Home Assistant server. And then the entity ID is going to actually be the Waze sensor. So you can start just typing in and it should auto-populate. Now if you don't know which Waze sensor it is, because I actually do have 4, you can go back into Home Assistant in the states page and actually look at the friendly name and grab it there. So the Waze sensor I'm looking for is actually going to end with the B62C. So we'll go back to node red and we'll use that one, B62C, and we'll go ahead and hit done. And that's our front bath motion. Now what's going to happen, it will create a payload of the action of what happened with the motion sensor, and it's going to be that on or off as shown in the states page. So under the function section, we need to grab a switch to determine what to do, whether we receive that on or off. So drag out the switch, and we'll go ahead and connect them simply by dragging from one dot to the other, and we'll give it a name of on/off, and we'll leave the payload as the payload. And remember, we said we're going to get an on or an off. So we're going to do an on, and it does show in lowercase on the states page of Home Assistant. Then we'll add another one of off, and this is equals, and it is a string, and also is a string, and then we'll hit done. So now we've got two choices to hook things up to, whether it is an on. If you highlight over it, it will show you it's an on or an off. So then it's basically going to branch based on when the message goes to that switch. Now, there are a bunch of different ways you could do this. Next step, you could actually tell Home Assistant to turn that switch on, or you could use MQTT, whatever way you want to do it. There's no real wrong way of doing it. Now, we're going to use a straight MQTT call to turn the switch on. So we're going to use the output MQTT. We'll drag this one out. Now, if you haven't already used MQTT in Node Red, you will need to hit the little pencil icon and go put in your IP address, and if you're using a username and password, to allow Node Red to connect to MQTT. Now, the topic, well, of course, we're going to cheat a little bit. Let's go copy and paste from the switch itself. If you go to the switch, go to the console, and we're just going to take one of the commands here and have the tele. We'll just change it. We'll paste it in the topic here. And we're not going to use the telemetry. We're going to use a command, CMND. Now take note, if you are using the auto discovery, that the topic will be first, then the command. And then we're going to use power 1 as the command, because the way MQTT works, you can send any command you want over MQTT just like you'd be in the console of Tasmota. So just put command, the topic, and then what command you want, and it's simply the same as you were typing on the console in Tasmota itself. Now you may be tempted to want to do something where you're doing power 1 and then put on. Well, you can't do that. That's not the topic. That's actually going to be your payload. So we'll leave everything the same. We don't want retain. We'll just hit done. And if we don't give it a name, it just automatically defaults to the topic, which is fine. And then we'll simply drag the on to this. And now what that's going to do is when the motion turns on, it hits the branch, it goes to on, and it passes that payload of on to power 1, which happens to want on as well. So it turns the light on in the room. Now we need to do the off side of when the motion sensor stops sensing any motion in the room. We need to go to off. So what we need to use is a stop timer. Now, if you want to, instead of scrolling up and down the list in Node Red, you can simply do a partial type in the search in the top left. We'll do stop, and we need to stop timer. And we'll drag it out here and let go. It defaults to a 5-second timer. We're going to go with 180 seconds. That'll give us time to leave the light on in the room and also redetect motion if we need to. So we'll set the timer for 180 seconds, and we'll hit done. Now we'll hook up the off side to go into the timer. You can drag these out to make them a little easier to see. And then the top piece, which is the original payload, we want to send the off. We'll hook it up to the same MQTT output. So what'll happen is now when the motion turns to off, and the Waze sensor has about a 30-second delay. It'll stay on for about 30 seconds. And then it'll finally send the off to Home Assistant. So what'll happen when that motion stops for that after 30 seconds, it'll branch to the off and then go to wait for 180 seconds, and then we'll go and send that to the switch itself. Now, one byproduct of doing it this way, if someone comes into the room and re-triggers the motion, there's going to be a stop timer waiting, maybe less than 90 seconds, and then the light will immediately turn off. That's not good, because what it to do is anytime motion is re-triggered in the room is to restart the clock and do the countdown of 180 seconds. So an easy way to do that is if we simply drag another line from on down into the stop timer. Anytime it turns on, it's also going to start that 180 second timer. So that's it. That's all you got to do for the motion on the switch. It'll stay on for 180 seconds as long as there's motion in the room and it keeps getting re-triggered. Now don't forget to hit your deploy button. That'll save all your changes and we'll push it out and will start being used immediately. So there's a couple different travel time components you can use in Home Assistant. Now you can use, say, the Google Maps one. You can use the Waze. The Waze one is actually very simple to set up. You don't have to set up any type of billing or API key. You just put in your addresses and that's pretty much it. Now we did dummy up some information for the Waze ones. Now you can see by simply going to the component, it does pull about every 5 minutes and will update based on traffic information. Perfect for this switch, being able to see our commute time from home to work and be notified first thing in the morning whether we should just lollygag around or hurry up and take a different route to work. So all in all, we're going to use this sensor to kick off the flow that changes the color of the faceplate of the switch. Pretty simple. So next, one other flow we'd like to do is based on the power state of the switch itself. I want to change the small status light to go on or off and use two of the LED colors based on the status of the light. So to do that, we're going to sub to the power state of the light itself. Now for the input, we're going to use MQTT to kick off the flow. If you'd like, you can use the Home Assistant state change to look at the switch itself. But to skip the middleman, we're using MQTT. We're going to drag it out and we're going to copy and paste the topic from this one and change it to just the state. So instead of command, we want the state, which is spelled S-T-A-T without the E. Hit done. Now again, we want the on or off state of the switch itself. So we'll drag out a switch. Go ahead and connect it up. Now Tasmota sends over the on and off in uppercase. So we'll do on and add off. And just put on or off as the name. Now what we want to happen is we're going to turn on two of the LEDs when the light turns on in the room and turn the faceplate off. So what I chose is I wanted to turn on the red and the blue to give a purple status light when the light is on, just to show someone that that light switch is on and it turns the faceplate off. So what we'll do is we'll copy and paste this one here. And you can actually just click it once, hit Control-C, and then Control-V and paste it in and save yourself a lot of typing. And we'll change the power 1 to LED power 1. And then we'll also change it to LED power 3. Now since the payload is already being sent over as on when the switch comes on, let's go ahead and we'll just send that straight over to those two commands to simply turn that LED on. So we'll drag them both from the on decision and then drag it to the other. So what's going to happen is when the light switch actually turns on itself, whether an automation or someone pushing the front faceplate, hits the decisioning point of on and sends the two commands at the same time to LED power 1 and 3 to turn those both on. Now, you thought, well, what about the faceplate? The faceplate is going to stay on, right? Well, now let's send an off command to the power 2, which is the faceplate. So first we need our output. And we'll just copy and paste it again. Let's change the topic to power 2. Now we can't just send the original payload. We need to switch the payload from on to off. So how do we do that? We're going to use a change node. We'll drop the change node out here. And that's going to set the payload. We're going to say set. And you could put a 0 or an off. It doesn't matter, whatever makes sense to you. We'll do set off, and we'll set the payload to off and hit done. And you'll attach it to the on and set it to off, and then sends it to power 2. If you want to go ahead and deploy that, you can. You'll get all the little green showing you are connected. Now, of course, if you do want to test things at this point, it's not a bad idea. Well, how do you test it without, modifying some things or checking things? You can use the inject node. In the inject node, you can just drag them down and you can inject different payloads along different sections. And what I mean by that, you can actually take the inject payload and attach it into this section here and double click and change it that you want to send the payload of a string of on. And what that's going to do, once you deploy it and press this button, it's going to send an on just as it would have came from MQTT, but of course you're kicking it off yourself manually. It'll send the on up through this channel here and push it through the decisioning just like it came from MQTT. And you can put these injects all over, and that way you can check all your different things and you don't have to try to dummy things up, or you don't have to go try to trigger switches manually, etc. So the injects are very powerful in checking all your flows. So of course now we need, when the switch turns off in the room, we need to actually flip it back where the faceplate comes on, and then the LED power 1 and 3 turn back off. So really simple to set them back off for these two status lights is we'll simply drag a line from the off to LED power 1 and off to LED power 3. And then you guessed it, we're going to do just the opposite. We need to put a set on to change the faceplate one back on whenever the switch goes off. So we'll just copy this one here and paste it. We'll change it to set on, and we'll change the payload to on. And we'll drag it down to on, and then we'll drag it over here to turn the faceplate on. If you want to be able to see the lines, you can drag things around. That way you can see which lines are connected. It doesn't matter how you lay it out on the screen itself. As long as you get the lines connected correctly to the right nodes is all that matters. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and check the switch, trigger the motion, which should follow the first one. And then because the light turns on, it should change our status lights. I'll be right back. And that's it. It worked for me. Now, if you have something that's not working right, it's a good option to use a debug node. Simply drag out the debug node, and then you can view the status and the payload of anything that comes across. And we can go ahead and connect it straight up to the FBATH motion node. Now, we're just going to view the payload. Now, one thing to make it easier is if you go ahead and check the node status and hit done, it'll actually put the status of that sensor right below it. So we're going to hit deploy. And you can see it was off at 9:45, but we need to trigger it again. That way we can see the actual payload. It'll pop up right below the debug. And you can go look in this debug log and you can actually see all the messages in there as well. But I find it easier just to show it out on the map here. You don't have to go digging for things. So great. Now we have our status lights moving around the switch, but now how do we get it to show the commute times in, say, a red, a yellow, and a green status? That way it's a quick notification when you pass the switch in the morning. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to go down to the Home Assistant section. I'm going to grab the event state again, and then the binary sensor. If you just want to start typing in, we'll do Waze to work. And the state type is not going to be a string, it's going to be a number. And then we'll hit done. Now we have our Waze to work. And next thing, I don't want this doing this 24 hours a day. I only want to do this in the morning, that when I'll be passing the switch. So what I'm going to use is a time range. We'll drag it down. We won't give it a name. We're just going to change the start time to 0500 and the end time to 0600. And that should be good. It'll do it between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. for me. And yes, It will trigger on the weekends as well. We could put something in there based on the day, but I'm not going to be up at 5 or 6 a.m. to really care if it changes that based on the color on the days I don't work anyway. So next what we want to do is we want to put in a switch, because what I want to do is change to red, yellow, or green based on drive times. So of course, again, we're going to use the switch node. And pay close attention, we're going to actually have to put in 3 different pieces to this and change an option. Property is the message payload. Now it's not going to be equal to a z, which is a string. We need to change it to a number. So we'll change it to a number. Now one big key you need to do is change this bottom one down here. It says checking all rules. We don't want it to check all rules. We want to stop after the first match. And that way when it finds a match based on the range we want, it's going to stop and take that decision path. So what we're going to do is we'll do greater than or equal to 35, and then we'll add, and then we'll greater than or equal to 26, and then we'll do greater than or equal to 26, and then we'll do less than or equal to 25. And there are several different ways you could have done this, but I find this the simplest way. And do make sure you change all of these to number. It's very easy to forget. As you can see, I almost did. It's going to come in, and then it says, hey, is it more than 35? Yep. Then goes on out. If not, it goes down the list. Is it greater than or equal to 26? Well, sure enough. If not, otherwise it goes down to 25, and it'll choose that path. Now you'll notice we get 3 nodes off the side to hook up to. We'll go ahead and connect this one to the top one. Now the second one down here is if it's not within that time range, and we don't want anything to happen during that time range outside of that 5 to 6 a.m. Next we want to set the color of that faceplate, red, yellow, and green. So what we need is now the change node. We'll search for it again, and we'll drag the change node out. We'll go ahead and change this one to set red. Now, of course, you could do a call service of turn the light on, set the color, everything in Home Assistant, but of course, simply, quite frankly, writing JSON just simply sucks. So we're just going to send it over using MQTT using a simple color command. So we're going to set the payload, and the way Tasmota wants it is you can just simply put the first channel, which is red, 0 to 255 for the brightness. We'll do 255, 0, because we don't want any of the other channels. No green and no blue. And we'll copy this one actually 3 times because we want the red, green, and the yellow. And that's using the 255, 145, 36. Full green channel and 0 on the blue channel. And then we'll just simply connect them up. So you can see greater than equal to 35, that's going to be our red. Greater than 26, that's going to be our yellow. And then of course green, we'll set it to, now of course you're not going to be sitting in your map, so we're just going to move things around, that way it doesn't end up right behind me. So if you've probably already learned a little bit, you can already see we need to drop this into MQTT as a command to the switch. Now we need to change this from power to simply the color command. And then we'll drag these all into the same MQTT output. You don't have to make 3 of them, of course, because you're just going to reuse it. We'll go ahead at this point, we'll save our changes. They may be thinking at this point that you're done. Well, one of the problems is it's going to change the faceplate to always be red or green or yellow throughout the day until it gets back around to 5 a.m. Well, I want to use more of like a violet color, almost purple, on the faceplate during all day so the little ones can see it. So one way of doing this is we're going to go up to the status when the light turns on and off. We'll just go ahead and default it to a certain color. So to do this, when the switch turns back off in the room, we want the faceplate to be a color of violet. We already have the switch setting to on here. We can simply go down and have it check the time. If it's outside of that range, we're going to want to go ahead and change it to violet. So we'll copy our time range. So when the faceplate comes on, we'll want to check the time to see what to do with the color. Now if it's within 5 or 6 a.m., so now when the faceplate turns itself on, we need to send it back through and get the time it takes to get to work, and that way we can know what color to set it to if it's between 5 and 6 a.m. again. We need to grab the current state of the sensor in Home Assistant, and then Waze to work, and the state type is a number. So when it's between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., we'll stick it over here to go get the time. And then now it's gotten the time in the payload. Let's just shove it on through our previous logic and set the color, since we already have that done for us. So we'll simply take it here and shove it on through. Pretty simple. Reuse logic you already have. Now what about outside of the range? Well, let's just force it to the violet color that we want. We're just going to take one of these and say set violet, and change the color that we found, and hit done. And then when it's outside of the 5 to 6 a.m., we'll send it on to the change node here. And then, of course, again, we'll reuse the MQTT output of the color command. So drag it on over here and shove it into there. So you can see we didn't have to do any coding or anything crazy, except changing some color commands, and you have an entire flow for the light switch, and it will change the colors of the state based on a sensor in your home. Now you don't have to use, say, a commute time. You could use, say, even some temperatures or whatever you'd like to do to change and show you the status of anything in your home by simply changing the color of the light switch. Pretty cool stuff, all done in Node-RED. Don't forget to hit deploy up top. So that about wraps it up for another Node-RED video. We did a real-world automation of a RGB light switch of a sensor in your home. I appreciate you watching. Definitely, if you haven't already, become a subscriber. Hit the subscribe button. Give us a like. Give us a thumbs down, however you feel. And definitely comment down below if you have some other cool automations that you'd like to see or something that you've done in your home. And I appreciate my Patreon subscribers and the ones in Discord helping everyone out. And y'all take care.